When this homeless man's dog got sick out of nowhere, panic struck. The dog's owner quickly realized this wasn't just a simple stomach cramp, so professional help was needed. But when the man and his pet arrived at a local veterinarian, they were bluntly refused. He couldn't believe it. Why wouldn't she help? But then, days later, this happened. Vet refuses to help homeless man's dog. Days later, this happens. The sad turn of events all started on a rainy Monday afternoon. Martin had just woken up from a short nap underneath the bridge he and his dog had called home. But instead of waking to the sight of his furry friend's wagging tail, Martin saw something much more heartbreaking. His 9-year-old dog Toby was lying on his side and was whining intensely. There clearly was something wrong with him. The sight of his dog in pain awoke Martin instantly. He had his dog for years, and little Toby made his way through the harsh conditions of homeless life effortlessly. So the fact that his four-legged friend now showed signs of struggle meant that there was something serious going on. Martin shifted his body next to Toby and held the dog in his arms. It seemed like he had pain in his stomach, Martin thought. Martin looked at his dog with a worried face. Toby was whining more and more, and the homeless man felt his dog shiver in his arms. It was a horrible feeling. Martin did not know what was going on. Did he eat something he was not supposed to? Did he have a stomach infection? A million thoughts ran through the worried owner's head. But his conclusion was always the same: Toby needed professional help. They needed to find a vet who could take a proper look at Toby, and they needed to find one quickly. So, without hesitation, Martin lifted his dog off the ground. It was already late in the day, and if they wanted to find a still open vet, they needed to hurry. Martin asked around and discovered that the town only had one veterinarian, and it was just a few blocks away. Martin quickened his pace because the pedestrians told him the vet would close in 5 minutes. After a tiring sprint, Martin made it to the vet in the nick of time. The lights inside were still on, meaning he made it in time. But beyond that, the rest of the waiting room was completely empty. The worried dog owner freed up one arm and tapped the vet glass window with his index finger. Martin was happy to see that the vet's waiting room was empty. He realized that his appearance as a homeless man was far from pleasant, and he always feared the judgment of strangers, especially in an indoor environment. But with the vet's office clear of customers, he had nothing to worry about. At first, there was no response. So, after a short wait, he tapped a bit harder using his entire fist. The window of the vet's officer vibrated because of Martin's knock. Surely, this would be enough to get the vet's attention, Martin thought. He usually didn't like to be this forward, but the whining dog in his arm forced his hand. And this pushy tactic seemed to work because moments later, the vet walked out of her enclosed office and into the hallway. Martin held up Toby, indicating that he needed help. The sight of the female doctor was one of relief. It meant that Toby was going to get the help he desperately needed. No veterinarian would leave an animal out in the cold when it was clearly sick, not even when it belonged to a homeless man. "You're going to get better, Toby. This woman is going to make sure of that," Martin spoke to his dog in a kind voice. But Martin and Toby were up for a big surprise because when the female doctor arrived at the door, she only opened it a bit. Martin wanted to enter with his dog and put one foot forward, but the woman kept most of the door shut. Her hand gripped the handle tightly like she was ready to block Martin's path of entry. "What do you want?" the white-robed lady said in a harsh voice. The tone of this woman took aback Martin. He wasn't expecting a warm welcome since his appearance and time management weren't ideal. But to be so rudely received was unexpected. Martin gazed into the woman's eyes and explained what happened to Toby. He said that he woke up and found his dog in serious pain. Martin pointed to Toby's belly and thought he had convinced the vet enough to let them in. But Martin was severely mistaken. The vet responded in quite the opposite manner. She blatantly refused Martin and Toby access to the building, telling them to leave the place and never return. It was an unexpected response. But what troubled Martin's mind the most was the tone in which she said it. There was anger in her voice, almost like she was looking for a fight. Martin scraped his throat, but But there was no time to react to this woman's rude rejection. Before Martin knew it, the door was slammed shut again. The woman locked the door and used the slide bolts on the top and bottom to secure it even further. After that, the woman closed the office blinds and left Martin and his dog to fend for themselves in the street. Martin just stood there, confused and defeated. Martin held Toby close to his chest to provide the poor dog with as much comfort as he could muster. How can a doctor who takes care of pets be so cruel when an animal in need crosses her path? Martin didn't understand any of this. Was it because he was a homeless person? Maybe she was worried that he wasn't going to pay. Or perhaps she just found his appearance off-putting. Martin walked away from the vet's officer with a sad feeling in his heart. He felt discriminated against, and he was worried for Toby's well-being. Martin looked over his shoulder and saw the vet staring at him through the blinds she had closed just moments before. This woman was horrible, and Martin hoped never to see her face again. "We're on our own, Toby. Nobody will help us." But this thing was far from over. Martin and Toby reached their hideout underneath the bridge. A place that wasn't ideal for a sick dog. But it was the only place that felt like home to them. Once there, Martin did his best to make Toby feel as comfortable as possible. He placed a blanket over the shivering animal and shared every bit of feed he could find. The poor old man did his best, but it was tough. The situation seemed hopeless for the homeless man and his furry friend. But all of that changed when Martin woke up a few days later. The 65-year-old Martin blinked his eyes twice and stared at the river next to his sleeping quarters. "This is going to be another rough day," he uttered to Toby, who was still whining severely. But when Martin looked to the open space next to his mattress, he suddenly saw something. There was a small box that wasn't there the night before. Martin looked around and saw no one in the near vicinity. "What is it?" the old man said. He grabbed the package from the cold, wet pavement with a stretched-out arm. He shook it around, trying to figure out what could be inside. But nobody could have prepared the old man for what was hidden inside. He used his nail to open the box. And when he peered inside the cardboard container, his eyes filled up with tears instantly. There were medicines inside. And not just any plain tablet. The box was filled with very specific antibiotics and painkillers. All were intended for stomach and bowel problems for dogs. There was only one possible explanation for all of this. The veterinarian from a couple of days ago must have found them and placed the box there. Martin ruffled through the pill-filled boxes and saw that there also was a little note at the very bottom. He read the written message, and when he did, it proved his hypothesis. The medicines came from the vet, who refused them entry days before. It stated that the medicines she provided would probably help Toby. But she also requested them once more to stay away from the clinic. "For your own safety." Martin was confused about why this woman, who did not want him and his dog around, decided to go through all this trouble for them. It was not like they were hiding, but finding one man in a town full of people could not have been an easy thing to do. But there was no time to question her motives. Martin grabbed the medicine and started feeding them to Toby. After Toby took the pills, things looked up again. The dog's shivering stopped the same day. And after 48 hours, the sickness seemed gone altogether. Martin was overjoyed to see the wagging tail of his dog again and was extremely thankful to the vet, who had a weird change of heart. The old man knew they weren't welcome at her clinic, but Martin chose to ignore her request because a thank you was in order. With a fully recovered Toby, Martin walked through the heart of town. Life looked joyful again now that his dog was well again. And the old homeless man felt that the kind veterinarian needed to hear that. Martin and Toby arrived at the vet's clinic around closing time again. He was still afraid of judgment, so he came by when customers were at a minimum. Martin saw the vet through the clinic window. Martin was about to tap on the window, hoping that the woman would greet him kindly this time. But right before he made his tapping motion, a second person came into the frame. It was a tall man with darkly colored hair. He wore no robe, and he came out of a dark back room of the clinic. Martin watched the scene unfold from the clinic window. And what he witnessed then shocked him. There was something about this man that triggered Martin. And apparently, it did the same thing to Toby. The fully recovered dog started growling softly like it was getting ready to face danger. Toby had never acted like this before, which made the situation feel even more tense. Martin squinted his eyes and focused on the scene inside the clinic. A strange feeling manifested itself in Martin's stomach. Something is off. Martin hid behind a stone pillar in front of the clinic to hide from the man. He tucked his body against the brick structure as tightly as possible so no one would notice he was there. And once he was positioned properly, he turned his head around the corner and gazed inside. The clinic's light was bright, almost making the window feel like a TV screen against the darker night sky. Martin inspected the second person thoroughly. The man was wearing a dark-colored, expensive-looking suit, not something you typically might see in a veterinarian clinic. It seemed like the man and the vet were caught up in a heated conversation of some sort. Well, it was not much of a conversation since the suited man did most of the talking. He came across as menacing and spoke in a high volume. There was something off about this situation. Martin got the feeling that the female vet definitely did not want to be there. It was almost like the man forced her. Martin closed his eyes and tried listening to what the man was saying. The high volume of his voice was just loud enough to make it through the clinic window. "You must be more careful, nobody may know about this." The man used his index finger to poke the woman's chest as if he wanted to make his point even more clear. Martin saw that the veterinarian gave a nervous response. She felt intimidated by the man and only shook her head up and down without speaking. It was a threatening thing to watch, and Martin grew very concerned for the woman who helped him and Toby. But then something unexpected happened. Maybe it was the loud sounds coming from the suited man's mouth, or maybe Toby could feel the tension building up in Martin's body. Whatever it was, Toby responded to it. The small, scruffy dog opened its mouth and started barking uncontrollably. The noise Toby produced was like an alarm, instantly triggering the suited man inside. His face turned to the window, and the man walked to the front door. The man opened the front door with one swift motion. But the moment he looked outside, nobody appeared to be there. He even looked behind the pillar Martin hid behind, but no one was found. The suited man scratched his head and then decided to go back inside. A little bit to the left, though, behind a large metal container sat Martin. He dove behind it just in time and was covering Toby's mouth. Martin shut Toby's mouth just in time for the suited man not to hear them. And with his hideout behind the dumpster secure, he waited out the time for the scary-looking man to leave. Martin lingered around for a long while. But eventually, he saw that the individual had left the vet's clinic through the back door. It was already night when this happened, which made it hard for Martin to scan the man's appearance. Martin saw that the mysterious individual entered a black car with tinted windows. The car was parked in an alleyway behind the clinic, which was suspicious to begin with. And when the car drove off with squeaking tires and high speed, Martin knew for sure that something was up. The man had left the back door of the clinic open, which was too much of an invitation for Martin to pass up on. The worried homeless man and his dog walked over to the open door and peeked inside the clinic. What Martin saw then was heartbreaking. The female veterinarian sat on the ground of her clinic and cried intensely into her hands. Martin approached carefully, hoping that doing so would not scare off the saddened woman. But Toby had other plans. The energetic dog ran into the building and jumped the crying woman. Toby started hugging and licking her, probably trying to cheer up the crying woman. It worked in a way because a small smile appeared on her face as the dog licked it. She looked up slowly, and Martin could see the frightened look on her face. But when her eyes witnessed Martin standing in her building, her expression changed. "I told you to stay away from this place," the woman said sternly. Martin had taken offense to these words before, but this time, he chose to ignore them. The old man spoke no words, but simply stepped forward, inching closer to the upset woman. "Is everything all right, madam?" Martin asked with worry and kindness in his voice. The vet said she was in a lot of trouble, more than she could handle. But she did not want to put other people in danger. Martin already figured that part out. The shoutiness of the man, combined with her crying, painted a very clear picture. Martin did not know the extent of the trouble she was in. He asked about it and waited for her response. The vet looked into Martin's eyes and, after that, scanned his entire persona. She was trying to figure out if he was trustworthy because her story would put all of them at risk. The vet hesitated at first because she was afraid to get someone else involved. But there was something about the way Martin carried himself that made her trust him. It also helped that Toby was still happily wagging his tail and tried to like her face the entire time. The woman's stern look and tensed-up posture softened quickly. And after that, she stood up and promised to tell Martin everything. The vet started by introducing herself. She said that her name was Dr. Emily Hart. She owned this clinic and worked in this building for over 20 years. And the man from before, who was he? Martin admitted that he was spying on them and said he witnessed the scene through the clinic's windows. The woman stated that the suited man first came in as a regular customer, but pretty soon, he came by daily, always around, or after closing time. Martin listened to Emily's words intently because they were filled with gloom and tension. Emily continued by saying that the man started intimidating her every chance he got. And it became clear that he was not here for a consultation at all. He had ulterior motives for being there and wouldn't stop until he got what he came for. Dr. Emily said that the mysterious man knew a lot of personal details about her. She knew about her husband and had detailed information about her children. And after he brought up my home address and children's recess times at school, I got spooked. Emily started crying again after sharing this information with Martin. If I did not give him what he wanted, he was going to hurt my family. What does he want from you? Martin asked curiously. Dr. Emily immediately cut through the chase. She said that the man wanted drugs. Drugs? Martin said, confused. Yes, drugs. You might not think it, but a veterinarian is quite a hotspot for all sorts of drugs. We stock large amounts of morphine, hard-to-acquire types of antibiotics, and many more rare medications. All of these drugs are expensive and could be targets for drug gangs. The still crying Emily went on to say that the man in question belonged to one of those gangs. He forced her to order large quantities of those drugs. Drug and administration agencies hardly check the purchases of animal care facilities. So, her veterinarian clinic was a perfect cover-up for this criminal's activities. Every day, more of these prescription drugs came in, and every day, the suited man came to collect. Emily told Martin again that if she did not comply, he was going to harm her family. The man said he knew where to find them and had the evidence to prove it. He even showed me the gun he was going to use if I didn't listen. Emily said she lived in fear daily. But she had no one she could talk to, so telling Martin right now kind of felt like a relief. Martin was in shock after hearing the veterinarian's story. He forgave the poor woman immediately in his head for refusing help the first time. Her reasoning was very logical. He wanted and needed to help her, but he couldn't do it alone. Martin told the woman that they needed the police to get involved. They needed manpower and resources. But Emily was afraid to do so. We just can't do that. Emily feared that if the police got involved, this thing would get too big. The suited man would surely get wind of it. And if he did, her family would be in great danger. Martin understood her thoughts, but also said there was no other way. You can't live like this. The old homeless man tried to calm the panicking woman. He also tried to convince her further that this was the only way. Somehow, his convincing worked because that same evening, the two of them and Toby, of course, visited the local police station. Upon entry, though, there was a small hiccup. When the two of them walked into the police station together, Martin stood out like a sore thumb. Emily stood next to him and was still crying a bit, and the way Martin looked provoked the policeman. Is this bum bothering you? Emily wiped away her tears and looked up at the police officer who spoke the words. She immediately took away all doubts and shut down the man. Emily told the officer that Martin was a friend and that he was there to help her, not harm or bother her. This man is a saint and deserves to be treated as such. The two of them and Toby sat down and told the policeman Emily's story. During the conversation, Martin and Emily both saw how shocked all the policemen were. They were used to small, petty crimes being reported, but this drug scandal was huge. They were heartbroken by what happened to Emily and moved by Martin, who went above and beyond to help the poor woman. Emily admitted that it felt good to finally share her story with people. Now, she only hoped that they would help. Martin felt tears filling his eyes as he listened to Emily's story again. It definitely did not become less impactful on a second hearing, that much was sure. The old man's heart broke again, and he added a voice of urgency to Emily's story. "We have to help her, and we have to do something now," he urged. The police agreed and got started right away. There was one advantage to this entire ordeal. They at least knew where the man would be every day around the same time, at the clinic where, this time, a surprise would be waiting. They had the entirety of the day shift to prepare for the man's arrival since they knew he would arrive around 6. The police team worked with Emily and Martin to set up the trap. They kept the clinic open and worked secretly to not arouse any suspicion. Emily helped customers with their pets all day and tried to put on a brave face. And when her shift neared its end, it was time to execute the plan. Emily was extremely nervous, but she was ready to finish this. Luckily for her, Martin was around all day as well. He was her rock. His kind words kept her sane throughout the day. He waited in a back room and provided calmness when needed. After the last customer left the clinic, it was time to spring the trap set by the police. The officers took their positions in darkened offices, which were located in the back. The offices surrounded the medicine room, which the criminal would surely go to during his visit. The clock struck 6, and the clinic's back door opened. Emily was already standing in the hallway when it did. "It's time," she whispered to herself. Seconds later, the suited man entered the facility and wasted no time. He had sunglasses on, which he took off when he looked at Emily. "I'm here for my order, Emily. Do you have it?" Emily nodded and smiled politely so he wouldn't figure out what was happening. The vet guided the man to the medicine room, the same room they visited all days prior. But this time, things would be a bit different. The medicine room was opened, and Emily switched on the lights. She had put in the order the evening before, and all drugs were present in the room. The suited man smiled as he entered, thinking this would be an easy pickup. He grabbed the boxes and exuded a rude form of confidence. But the moment he had his hands full, Emily took a large step backward and shut the room's door. With that move, she locked the man inside while locking the room from her side. She could hear the suited man's voice through the door, and he wasn't happy. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted. The man kicked the door a couple of times, and after his second kick, the door broke open. But Emily wasn't waiting for him on the other side. Once the door was open, 5 officers stood there. They had guns pointed in his direction, and moments later, the man was being pushed down into the ground. The policemen overpowered him by force and arrested the evil man on the spot. Emily was crying as she witnessed the scene from a safe distance. Martin also appeared out of his darkened office. He stepped closer and pulled Emily toward him. "It's over, you don't have to be afraid anymore," he told Emily. Things were looking up with the man in custody, and Emily finally felt safe. A week later, the man's criminal trial arrived, and Martin was there, too. He was a key witness in the prosecutor's case. And with everything he saw, his evidence was key in sending the suited man to jail. He had exchanged his expensive suit for an orange jumpsuit, and he was sent to prison for a very long time. Emily could finally tell her family about what happened in her clinic. Her husband and her children hugged Martin for all his help in the case, and afterward, they even had a surprise for him. Martin became a close friend of the family, and no friend of theirs was allowed to live on the streets in poverty. That's why they all decided to help the old man. Martin was given a second chance at life. The old man got a simple cleaning job at the clinic. It wasn't much, but it gave him an income and a way to support himself and his dog. He even got offered a small apartment above the clinic. It was small but homely, and he gladly paid his rent every month, knowing he was paying a friend. Things were looking up for the old man, and it was all because he helped a stranger.